Good morning. My name is Clarence Travers, and we're going to focus on the book of Genesis in its entirety, as you will. And keep in mind, though, even though we're going to quote facts, this is going to cover a period of approximately 2,400 years. So that they are stacked up in the Bible, but they are not as close as they may appear. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is one of the most dynamic verses that you will ever find in the Bible, because here we have God being introduced and we have the earth being formed. And there will be no other place that this will occur except for in the beginning, based on this. Of course, as God was going through the stages, he created light. He created the light, and he separated it and caused day and night to be there. Then he, of course, created vegetations, and he created animals, and he created the sea world, and all of these kinds of creatures. And after he had gone through all of the process of the creation, he then formed man, or he created man, if you will, because man does not exist in this plateau until this time. From that vantage point, we find that this is a sincere creation. Once he created man, then the story moves away to a different environment, because now man is going to be involved in the process. In the book of Genesis, this goes essentially from chapter 1 through and including verse 2 through about 24. At this point, at the point of creation of man, and after he has created also a woman from man, which means that was another important creation, then there creeps in something that is going to be ruining our lives from now on, and that thing is going to be called Satan, and is identified as a serpent. This serpent is talking to Eve, and he's getting Eve confused in the process. If I didn't give a name to them, forgive me. We're talking about Adam as the created one and Eve as his spouse that was created from his rib. Okay, once the serpent comes into the scene, of course, then sin is immediately put into the mix, because now not only does man have God to listen to, but somebody else is on the scene, and man makes a decision who he's going to listen to. And we go through that process, and we're not going to lose the details there, but during the process of all what has happened, it now gets back to the form, or the time rather, that God is going to come back on the scene and talk to Adam. When he comes back to talk to Adam, we find that Adam and his wife are going to go and hide, because they don't want to be seen by God. Why? Because they are now naked. And now God wants to know, how do you know you're naked? Because he hadn't put that on the plate up until this time. So from that standpoint, we see a mix that is getting sort of interesting now. And man who has been introduced or made by God, who has been given provisional knowledge of and has been given a place to live and to work for God, has decided to not listen to God. You can just imagine, under these conditions, excuse my expression, but all hell's getting ready to break loose. This is the kind of environment that we cause because we don't want to listen to God. And that becomes extremely important in the series of information we're dealing with today. As we're progressing on into the next environment, we get down to the point in chapter 3 that now we have that blame game. We have disobedience that has been put into the mix. The query is coming on about who has done what. And all of a sudden, we find that the man wants to blame the woman wants to blame the serpent. So everybody's going to be shifting blame. And keep in mind that this didn't happen automatically. This is because man made a choice. And now he's got to live with the choice that he's made. That becomes a huge point for us to follow in the process of the dynamics of the book of Genesis. God provides even when we're disobedient. And this becomes hugely important, because even though he had given Adam a primary place to live, he had now banished him from that place, but still gave him a farm and still gave him something that he could do and survive, take care of himself and his family. We picked that up in chapter 3, somewhere around verse number 12 to 21. God provides even when we are disobedient. But after man has been banished from that garden, the married couple now parented Cain and Abel. And after we get into the environment of Cain and Abel, we get into another mix. We get the jealousy syndrome that's coming into the mix now. And that becomes really interesting because after Cain and Abel had started to work, they also had to bring a tithe to the Lord. And once they brought their tithe, we find that God was pleased with one and not pleased with the other. What happens in a situation like this? Anytime God is not pleased with us, we want to tear down the one that God is pleased with. And this started way back at Cain and Abel. And we can see that evolving as we look at humankind right now. Anytime somebody is doing well, you look at the persons around them. Somebody's always trying to throw mud on him, always trying to put him down, because actually jealousy is determining that kind of behavior, or is promoting that kind of behavior. As we move forward, people begin worshiping the Lord. We're all the way down into chapter 4 now. People begin worshiping the Lord. Once they start to worshiping the Lord, then we find the generations that are being involved. And of course, if we find generations coming, we're finding a huge growth that is occurring based on the persons of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. And the first thing that I want to mention is a name that shows up 2 different times in the book of Genesis, and sometimes we might oversight it. We find that Cain, after he had murdered his brother, he married and he produced a son, and one of the first names that he came up with was the name Enoch. Now keep in mind that we also know that Enoch walked with God, so if we're not careful, we might think that Cain's Enoch walked with God. It wasn't Cain's Enoch. It's going to be an Enoch that comes up a little bit later, and we'll focus on that in a minute, because we're going to focus on the Enoch that did walk with God. He didn't come from Cain, he came from Methuselah. And we find that also in chapter 4 as we're moving forward. Moving on down into chapter 6. As the population increased, the men was drawn affectionately to the beautiful women and married whomever they chose. Their actions were increasingly uncomfortable to God. God regretted that he made man and was ready to destroy all men, found in chapter 6 now. But Noah comes on the scene, and Noah had found favor with God. And because of this, God altered those plans. Noah was a godly man. According to the Bible, he also walked with God. And we'll find that a very discriminating verse or statement that comes up a little bit later on. God saw that everything on the earth was ruined. All living creatures were sinful. He told Noah to build an ark. He was to put rooms in it, and he revealed the blueprint to Noah. He told Noah who and what to put into the ark. God blessed Noah because of his godliness. Once he got the ark filled and following all the prescription that God had given him, then God sent rain. This is how he was going to destroy the earth. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And according to the scripture, the water stayed on the earth for 150 days, which means that you know without a doubt that there would have been no life left on earth during this period. After the exit from the ark, when it was time for Noah to leave the ark, he sent a bird out. Let a bird go out, and he found that the bird came back to him because there was no place to land. And this series went on for several different times, and finally, when the bird was sent out, the bird didn't come back. Or when it came back, it finally came back with a leaf. And that was an indication that the waters had receded. And now something different is going to start to happen, because once Noah comes out of that ark, he's going to get a serious instruction from God, and that instruction is to repopulate the earth. And of course begins with Noah and his 3 sons. So that was a family that was included, which did not identify as a family unit, but that was a family of Noah, his wife, and his three sons and their wives, who were the persons who were in this environment to start and to replenish the earth. They had authority to eat whatever he chose, but no blood was to be consumed. God confirms his covenant with Noah and all living things that were in the ark in chapter 9. God declares, never again will all life be killed by flood waters. And we can put stock in that even today. I will put my rainbow in the clouds to be a sign of my promise to the earth. So each time you see that rainbow in the sky right now, then you recognize that that started way back when Noah was on the scene and was obedient to God. And we still see that rainbow. And sometimes we are so amazed because we might see two or three at the same time across several plateaus of the sky. Noah lived to be 950 years. And under him, once Noah was on the scene, we also had what is called the beginning of nations, which means now that there's going to be some separation of Noah's, like they have grown to such a point that they are now scattering because they can't all stay on the same grounds and manage their growth factors because of their animals and that sort of thing. In the beginning of nations, we find interactions through Noah's family that leads us to the Tower of Babel. In the Tower of Babel, we are making a decision. I'm saying we now as a part, I'm now a part of that group for just a minute. We are now wanting to build a ladder that will take us all the way to the heavens. But you remember now, God did the creation and God has stepped back and he has let man do the ruling, but he hasn't lost perspective of who man is and what man is doing. So the God factor, the Godhead, was listening and paying attention and decided that it was time for them to go down and interact with man because man was not doing what he was supposed to with the right attitude. He was going somewhere he wasn't supposed to go. And he says man was going to learn more than he needs to know, and he'll be just as good as we are. That type of thing is a part of what is driving right now. So then what God did, they were building on the Tower of Babel. God came down and he became problematic for the occupants. The Lord declared that there was no limit on their capabilities. He now decided to confuse their language. And when they confused their language, they could no longer talk to each other. They could talk to their family members because their family members would have the same language that the original host would have, but they could not talk to each other. And now they started scattering. And of course, this is where we get to what we call the introduction of the building of nations. Because now nations are going to develop because they're going to go in based on their language, and they will have a language that is communicable to each other who's there, and they will grow in that environment but could no longer speak to their other family members whom they had departed from. Down around chapter 12, Abram was to leave. He introduced Abram in chapter 12, and of course you know the story where God told Abram to leave his land, leave his family, and to go to a land or to a place where he didn't know where he was going. And this becomes extremely important because as we now follow and we start the pattern of Abram, we're going to find something so significant that happens based on how Abram interacted with God. After the promise, Abram deceives Pharaoh by not being true. Now keep in mind, I've jumped because they are now traveling into Egypt's territory. And at the point of going in, Abram is uncomfortable because his wife is so beautiful. And he thinks that Pharaoh might want to kill him so that he can have his wife. So then they decided that they would just say that they were brother and sister. Okay, so a little lie wouldn't be too bad because I'm trying to save and protect my marriage. But nonetheless, as Abram went along, Pharaoh did take his wife from him. But now watch this, because God is involved. The story doesn't stop there. As Pharaoh was dealing with his own, God came into Pharaoh's life now and told him that he had one of his servants, the wife of one of his servants. And boy, Pharaoh got hot. He was incensed. He told Abram, you've tricked me. You weren't supposed to do this to me. You got me in trouble. But anyhow, that was settled in a fashion that is peculiar, because now men who are on opposite sides of the truth are now going to have to settle their differences so that they can move forward. And that becomes extremely interesting at that time. But anyhow, the process keeps on. We're not going to go into those details beyond that. The Lord protects Abram and his wife in spite of Abram's apparent weakness. Then we have Lot that was traveling with Abram when he left home. That was a part of Abram's a close family, if you would. And they both have been quite successful in what they were doing. And as the story goes on, they had so many animals and things, and they were on the same land that the land couldn't support them both. So now they've separated, and they've kind of gone in a little distance. So Abram was extremely interesting how he did this. He told Lot, "You choose where you want to go, and I'll take whatever's left." And that was an extremely important role for somebody who was actually in favor of God. But nonetheless, Lot chose where he was going, and would you believe, he chose a place called Sodom, right at the entrance of Sodom, and he was a part of the Sodom territory. So he ended up being in that environment. Now, when you get into Sodom, so that you don't have any doubts about what the city is all about, we had some of the hosts who came to the area where Lot and Abram and those were, and they wanted, not Abram, excuse me, where Lot and his family were, and they wanted to invite the men out. The men wanted to invite the men out. So now, I don't know, the same way, we've got daughters in here. Well, why don't you just take the daughters? No, they weren't satisfied. They were getting ready to tear down the place to get the men. So you can see what kind of an environment that Lot was exposed to. So anyhow, he got caught up. They were able to move away from that premise, and they got caught up in the environment because Lot was living in that area, and God didn't like what he was seeing. So God decided that he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. At this point, of course, Abram, knowing that some of his family was there, he started to having a pleading session with God. And he started off with, I can find 50 people there who are obedient to you. Say, will you not destroy? And that went from 50 all the way down to 5. And let's believe it, the place was destroyed because they couldn't find 5 who were in Sodom and Gomorrah who actually believed in God, which was huge from that vantage point. So we didn't have, so we keep on going. He destroyed it, and of course Lot's wife who was inside, and she was told never to look back as she was leaving, and she chose to look back. I guess she just had to see it one more time. Well, she saw it forever from this vantage point that she became a pillar of salt right there looking back. And that was also something that we should be so aware of. Going a little bit further, we get to the part that God is now, let's see, he has moved into the area of dealing with Abraham. And of course, Abram in chapter 17 is no longer going to be called Abram, but he is now going to be called Abraham. In this environment, Sarai, who is Abram's wife, is now going to be called Sarah. Of course, Abraham is going to be identified as the father of nations, and Sarah will be called a princess. Also introduced into this is the circumcision of a male. Now remember that by the time the need to circumcise was introduced, Abraham was already 90 years old, and by the time he had a son with his wife's servant, once that son was about 13, well, they were both circumcised at the same time, but then it became permanent for all the Israelites on the 8th day that the Israelites would be circumcised. Of course, now Abraham has also been promised a son. And because he and his wife took the attitude of giving Abraham a son through a servant, Abraham wasn't satisfied with that because he hadn't had a son through his own family per se. And God made the promise that he would give it. So he didn't deny on his promise. It just didn't come when Abraham thought it would come. It's 10 years later when he finally ended up with that son. 100 years old. His wife was 90. But then he received the assurance that the sacrificial portion that was identified to him had been done. The blessings of God that could not happen any other way. Then God gives Abraham a test. Wants to know what side of the fence Abraham is on. So he sends his son Isaac to go up. He sends Abraham to ask him to take his son up onto the mountain to prepare him as a sacrificial lamb. And Abraham had the faith to continue doing what he was doing. Every time Isaac would ask a question about this, Abraham said, the Lord will provide. And then, of course, Abraham goes on and continues until it is time to actually insert the knife into the son, and he provides a lamb for his servant to sacrifice. And once that sacrifice has been completed, then Abraham resumes his life. Not very long after that, Abraham's wife Sarah passes. Abraham's servant finds a wife for Isaac, and they marry. Abraham's second wife, and that death occurs in the 25th chapter. Going down to same location, Isaac's son Ishmael fathers 12 sons, including Esau and Jacob. And that is coming to the point of the blessings of Jacob, because remember, Jacob stole his birthright from his brother Esau. And that one becomes an interesting twist because it shows up again a little bit later on. Jacob gets Isaac's blessing, not on the father's desire, but because that was Isaac's choice. And Isaac sends Jacob away for safekeeping. Once he goes away, he goes through something that is extremely interesting. This is the case when he wrestles with God. And once he wrestles with God, and he keeps asking God, what is his name? Of course, God wouldn't give him a name. But once he finishes wrestling with God, he recognized that he had a physical problem in his thigh. But then God renamed him. Told Isaac that his name would no longer be Isaac, but that his name would be Israel. And this is where he moves from that point. And at this point, then Israel is able to obtain the wife. And of course, he goes through a spiel with his uncle and trying to get the wife that he wanted, because he chose one wife and he was strict because he had to marry the sister before he could marry the wife he chose. But he didn't relent. He stayed right there and worked for 14 or 15 years, whatever that number is, until he got that wife. I think it was 7 years for each wife. So it was 14 years. And of course, we deal with Jacob and his part of his life in chapters 29 through 32. And we get through Jacob and Esau and the fear factor in chapter 3. Now, what is the fear factor? When it was time for Jacob to return home, he feared that his brother would not have forgotten or forgiven him for him stealing his birthright. Of course, his brother had been successful in what he was doing, and he wasn't concerned. But as they were traveling, his brother sent out a party to greet them, and it wasn't the kind of party that Israel wanted, because he thought the party meant a fight. But his brother was just doing what his brother knew how to do. And that was, of course, the land that he was involved in. And of course, they got together. And then when Israel Jacob tried to give his brother goods and things, brother, what you giving me all this for? I got more than I need already, so keep your goods. So that was one of the ways that you appeased somebody that you were having difficulty with. But that process didn't work. But nonetheless, the brother had no thought of animosity toward his brother whom he hadn't seen for all these years. He was just happy to be reconnected with his brother. And that period, we find some serious love that has resurfaced in spite of some differences that may have occurred in times past. That's a huge factor for us. Jacob returns to Bethel and his communion with God. Once he returns to Bethel, we're down around chapter 35 now, he goes on and he communes with God. He sets up a proper communion because he wants to make certain that he stays in harmony with God. Israel's sons are identified in chapter 23 to 26. And of course we find from his brother in chapter 36, we find the Edomites who are showing up on the scene. And of course, they are also in direct competition. The numbers look unreal from the standpoint of the brothers having 12 sons each and that sort of thing. But it just follows a pattern that this is a different nation. It is not the nation that God is choosing to deal with at that point in time. About chapter 37, somebody named Joseph shows on the scene. And we know the story about Joseph. He's the one who had the coat of many colors. And of course his brothers were awfully jealous about him, and when they were sent to do a job, all of a sudden the brothers decided that they would kill him. Well, they couldn't come up with the proper things to kill him, so they decided they'd let somebody else have him. So they put him in a little area where he couldn't get out until they could all get away. And that's a story that takes on another curve altogether, because Joseph is now being left alone and being left to die. But Joseph also knows God. And as the process continues, he becomes a part of Pharaoh's team. Joseph did pretty well initially with Pharaoh until Pharaoh's wife got into the mix. And once Pharaoh's wife got into the mix, she was trying to seduce Joseph, and Joseph wasn't having any part of it. So what did the wife do? When she was in Joseph's room, Joseph was in her room, she decided to, I think I said it right the first time, I'm getting myself confused, give me just a second. When she was in Joseph's room, she tore off her garment and said that Joseph had been trying to do things with her that he wasn't supposed to do. And of course, Pharaoh sent him to jail. Stayed in jail for quite a bit of time. And when he was in jail, Pharaoh had a dream. And inside of the dream, he could not find anybody who could translate the dream. So somebody remembered that Joseph translated some dreams. So then they went and brought Joseph out, and Joseph told Pharaoh what his dream was all about. We're down on chapter 37. And of course, once it was determined that Joseph had hit that nail on the head, then Joseph was brought back to Pharaoh. And he became the number 2 man in Pharaoh's kingdom, because now there was a drought that was coming. And during the period of the drought that would last for 7 years, Joseph told them how to manage everything that they needed to do so that they could be successful during that period of time. We also have Jacob's son, during the same period, Isaac and his family were outside of the area of Egypt, and they needed food, and they had to come into Egypt to get their food. When Joseph was in direct charge of all the distribution centers, but Joseph recognized his brothers when they came in, but he didn't let them know that. And they went through some give and take, and of course Joseph's favorite brother was his brother Benjamin. And the daddy wouldn't let Benjamin come because he feared that something would happen to Benjamin. So what Joseph said, he told his brothers to go back, and they had to come back for restocking. And he says, and bring your brother Benjamin. And he wouldn't give them any food. So then the daddy had to let Benjamin come, but he was scared to death. It was the last one of his other sons, I've forgotten his name right now, declared that you let me take Benjamin and I'll be responsible for him to make certain that he gets back appropriately. Anyhow, as that story continues to go, Finally, Jacob and his family comes in, and the Joseph contingency is reconnected. Everybody knows who everybody is, and they've had a banquet, and the Pharaoh gave Isaac and his family land and everything that the whole family could come up there and survive. As we get down to chapter 50, in the last part, Joseph dies. Isaac dies first, and then Joseph dies, and this is in chapter 50. And we pray that you have been blessed from this presentation. May God bless and continue to protect you and keep you.